Okay, you can start.
Okay. Today we'll be looking at Shemini. I'd like to share the prayer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvato v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we have an opportunity to talk together today about Shemini. I'd like to just connect back to what Abigail was telling us so well last week about Nisan, Aries, the energy of the ram, and fire. And much of the beginning of this parsha is about fire. In the beginning, there are 7 days at the entrance of the tent of meeting where the rules for sacrifices are given and instructions for ordination of priests. And then at the conclusion of the inauguration of the Mishkan, the events, it is the 8th day, that's why it's called Shemini, the events that we're going to talk about take place. So if you can just lift up not lift up, if you can share the screen with the parts, the lines that I told you, that would be great. Okay, so we see that Moses and Aaron had gone inside the tent of meeting, and when they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh appeared to the people. Al-Kol Ha'am appeared to all the people were gathered. And the fire came forth from before Adonai and consumed the burnt offering and the fat parts on the altar. And all the people saw and shouted and fell on their faces. I just want to highlight here the words that we'll be seeing 2 more times. Fire came forth from before Adonai. V'tetzei ish milifnei Adonai. Mi lifnei Adonai, from before Adonai. And the word lifnei is very interesting because it's pnei. Lifnei is saying pnei, and that's the face of, mi lifnei, from the face of, from before, the face of Adonai. And we see that all the people see Adonai. But then when we go on to 10, the next one, what happens next is that Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu. Now let's remember that Nadab and Abihu are names. Abihu is, he is my father, Abi, who. So it's really the Lord is my father. And Nadab is Nadav, just like in Exodus, Kol, Nadiv Lev, Nadav is all about giving, generosity. And here it's to father, Nadav, the giving to the father. So these are very sacred names. And let's remember that these 2 young men had accompanied their father and Moses in Exodus 24 when they went up to the mountain. There were 70 elders, and they saw God. So now they had seen God there. They had just seen God together with all the people. But this is what they did. V'tetzei esh milfnei Adonai. Oh, I'm sorry, let's go back. Now, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it, and they offered before Adonai alien fire, which had not been enjoined upon them. But they offered lifnei Adonai, Esh Zara. That's the alien fire. But again, it's lifnei, to the face of the Lord, lifnei. Okay, and we go on and we see v'titzei esh milfanei Adonai, and then fire came forth. V'titzei esh milfanei Adonai and consumed them. So before the fire, it's the same exact words, v'titzei esh milfanei Adonai, which consumed the sacrifice. But here is v'titzei esh milfanei Adonai, came forth the fire and consumed them, Nadav and Abihu. Thus they died at the instance of Adonai. And then we go on, and Moses says to Aaron, this is what Adonai meant by saying, through those near to me, I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people. And Aaron was silent. So this is really very dramatic. What does this mean? Why did Nadav and Abihu offer an offering that wasn't asked of them? They had just been through their whole training camp for 7 days. They were learning about what to do. But they might have had such an urge, such an inner spiritual direction to be at one with God, that they just did what came to them spontaneously, what they thought God would want. Not what God was asking of them, not what they had been trained to be doing for a whole week, but they offered a strange fire, like on impulse, and their souls went to God. But that's not what God wanted. And as many interpreters say, God wants our service in this world, not to be giving your soul to God, but to be in this world and to be carrying out the work that you're supposed to be doing. Not to be thinking that you know what God wants. So Aaron's silence, there are a lot of different interpretations of it. Was it because he felt that, he had been a failure as a parent? Here, they've been teaching his sons. He had been learning to be devoted to God, but to keep the connection to the worldly and mundane issues. That's what he had to do because he was the leader of the people. But it wasn't what his sons did. Is Aaron's silence a sign of acceptance? One interpretation, actually from the Rambam, says that he cried and he screamed, and then he was silent. And that is really kind of a protest of what God's punishment was, by screaming, by crying, but then he was silent because he realized that he knew what he had to do. And later, soon after, and a few verses down, Moses warns Aaron and the other, remaining 2 sons not to drink an intoxicant. Did Moses think that perhaps Nadav and Abihu had been intoxicated? They didn't understand, but he did assure, he instructed Aaron how not to appear that he was in mourning, even though the whole kahal and the family would be expressing their mourning for the 2 sons who were lost. I've always found it curious and never really understood how they could have been carried out to outside the camp by their tunics. Here, the fire of God had just gone up and burnt them, but their tunics remained. So to me, it's kind of like saying it was really just their souls. It was their souls that wanted so much to be at one with God, that wanted just to, be right face to face with God, that went up in flames, but their outer garments, their tunics remained. One of the interpretations I was reading about compared the story to something in Nevi'im. And I'm just going to read that because I found it very interesting. This is Samuel 2 Samuel, chapter 6, verse 1 to 10. David again assembled all the picked men of Israel, 30,000 strong, and all the troops that set out with him from Baalim of Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, to which the name was attached, the name Lord of Hosts, enthroned on the cherubim. They loaded the ark of God into a new cart and conveyed it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Now, to me, that name, Abinadab, is like a combination of Abihu and Nadab. So there's like a clue that there's going to be some similarity. And here, Abinadab's sons, Uzzah and Ahio, guide the new cart. They conveyed it from Abinadab's house on the hill. Uzzah walking alongside the ark of God, and Ahio walking in front of the ark. Meanwhile, David and all the house of Israel danced before the Lord to the sound of all kinds of cypress wood instruments with lyres, harps, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. But when they came to the threshing floor of Nakon, Uzzah reached out for the ark of God and grasped it. I'll say that again. He reached out for the ark of God and grasped it, for the oxen had stumbled. The Lord was incensed at Uzzah, and God struck him down on the spot for his indiscretion, and he died there beside the ark of God. David was distressed because the Lord had inflicted a breach upon Uzzah. Okay, so here you see another example. I can see the parallel, that there was Uzzah thinking he had to do what he thought he had to do, protect the ark, because the oxen had stumbled and perhaps the ark was going to fall to the ground, which they wouldn't want. But the Lord was saying, you don't just impulsively do what you want to do because you think it's what I want. You have to listen to my rules. You have to follow rules. So I thought that was interesting. And the second part of this whole Parsha, Shemini, is when God says, he's already given the rules for sacrifices and coming close to the Lord that way, but now he's going to give all the rules of kashrut, which in many ways seems kind of arbitrary because reasons are not given. Reasons are not given for them, except that these things are an abomination. But he says, but the other thing that's interesting about these rules is that, like Pesach, most of these activities have to do with things that will happen in the home. And that therefore means it will become the responsibility of women to carry them out. He gives the instructions for what land animals you can eat and which ones you can't. And again, the only reason is saying that certain ones are unclean for you. And then the instructions for what things in the water, not to eat the things with fins and scales because they are an abomination. And then things that swarm because they are an abomination. And then at one point, it was interesting that an abomination are the things you shouldn't eat, but then it's in its verbs form, you shall abominate certain things. So that was interesting to read that. If you could pull up, well, you don't have to, I'll just, in 11 verse 44, he says, you shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. So, to me, a lot of these rules of kashrut are things that I was brought up with. Of course, it was a relief to hear that we're really not supposed to eat various lizards or mice or geckos or land crocodiles or chameleons, but it was very interesting that part of this describes how if you come in contact with these or their carcass, you can dip them in water and wait till evening. In many instances, if a person's been in contact with a dead animal, dipping in water helps, or just waiting till evening. And I found that very curious because it seems that given what kinds of punishments, we've just seen enacted, that simply waiting till evening, just bringing in the factor of time would be enough to cleanse and keep people following the ways of the Lord. It's just a very interesting thing, this whole thing about kashrut. So I would just like to ask, does anyone, for me, it seems an arbitrariness because there's really not a clear reason. It's just saying these are the rules. And as we've learned in the first part of the parsha, you need to follow the rules or else it may cost you your life. So that's all I wanted to share. And I just wanted to ask if other people had things that they would like to share from over the years, their interpretations of the death of Nadav and Abihu, or Moses' silence, or the rules of kashrut.